The day Sophia Jenkins found herself standing on the auction block in Portland, Oregon, was the day she stopped believing in miracles. The year was 1876, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty town square as dozens of rough-looking men gathered below, their eyes appraising her like she was livestock. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she kept her gaze fixed firmly on her worn boots, refusing to meet any of their stares. She had never imagined her life would come to this, standing before strangers who would decide her fate with nothing more than a handful of coins. The auctioneer, a portly man with a handlebar mustache and sweat staining his shirt, cleared his throat loudly. "Gentlemen, we have here Miss Sophia Jenkins, recently arrived from back east. She is 18 years old, healthy, and comes with letters of reference attesting to her good character and domestic skills. Let us begin the bidding at $20. Sophia felt bile rise in her throat. This was not technically a slave auction. Those had been abolished years ago, but it felt disturbingly similar. She was participating in what they called a mail-order bride auction, though she had not exactly volunteered for the position. After her parents died in a fire that consumed their modest home in Pennsylvania, Sophia had been left with nothing but debts. A distant cousin had arranged for her transport to Oregon with promises of respectable work, but upon arrival, she discovered the work was to become a bride to whichever man could pay the fee to cover her travel expenses and the cousin's trouble. 25, called out a grizzled prospector with more gaps than teeth in his mouth. 30, countered a rancher who looked to be at least 60 years old. Sophia's hands trembled as she clutched them together. She was small and slight, with long chestnut hair she had tried to pin back neatly despite her circumstances. Her green eyes, which her mother had always said were her best feature, remained downcast. She wore a simple gray dress that had seen better days, and she knew she must look as pathetic as she felt. $40, came a new voice, deeper than the others, and something in its tone made Sophia's eyes flick up despite herself. The man who had spoken stood at the back of the crowd, and even from a distance, Sophia could see he was different from the others. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore the typical attire of a working cowboy: worn denim pants, a dusty brown shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat he held in his hands. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, even from across the square. They were an unusual shade of blue-gray, and unlike the other men who looked at her with hunger or calculation, his gaze held something else. Concern, perhaps, or sympathy. 50, the old rancher countered, clearly determined. The tall cowboy's jaw tightened. 75. A murmur ran through the crowd. That was a substantial sum, more than most working men earned in 2 months. The rancher scowled and opened his mouth, but then seemed to think better of it and shook his head, backing down. The auctioneer looked around hopefully. $75. Do I hear 80? Anyone? $80, he waited, but the crowd remained silent. Most of them had been priced out of the bidding, and the few who could afford more seemed unwilling to compete with the tall cowboy, who had a reputation that preceded him. Sophia would later learn. 75 going once, going twice, sold to Xavier Lancaster for $75. Sophia's knees nearly gave out. Xavier Lancaster. She now knew the name of the man who had just purchased the right to marry her. She watched as he made his way through the crowd, pulling a worn leather wallet from his pocket. He counted out the money carefully and handed it to the auctioneer, who bit one of the coins to verify its authenticity before nodding in satisfaction. "Congratulations, Mr. Lancaster. The lady is yours." We will have the preacher ready within the hour to make it official." Xavier finally turned his full attention to Sophia, and she found herself unable to look away. Up close, he was even more imposing, standing well over 6 feet tall with a lean, muscular build that spoke of years of hard physical labor. His face was weathered by sun and wind, making him look older than his 26 years, but there was a gentleness in his expression that surprised her. He climbed the 2 steps up to the platform where she stood, and when he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Miss Jenkins, my name is Xavier Lancaster. I know this is not how anyone would choose to start a marriage, but I give you my word that I will treat you with respect and kindness. You will have a roof over your head, food on your table, and no one will hurt you. That is my promise." Sophia stared up at him, her mind reeling. She had expected crude comments or immediate demands. She had braced herself for the worst. But this man, this Xavier Lancaster, was speaking to her like she was a person, not property. Her throat tightened with emotion, and before she could stop herself, the question burst from her lips. "Why me?" Xavier looked taken aback by the question. He glanced around at the dispersing crowd, then back at her. "Why did I bid on you?" she nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "I heard about this auction last week. I did not approve of it, the whole thing sits wrong with me, but I knew it was going to happen whether I liked it or not. I also knew the kind of men who would be here, and what kind of life they would give you." He gestured toward where the old rancher and the toothless prospector had stood. "I am not a rich man, Miss Jenkins, but I have a decent ranch about an hour's ride from here. I have been alone for a long time, and I could use a partner, someone to share the work and the life. I thought maybe I could offer you something better than what those other men would give you. That is all." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past few weeks, and she refused to break down now. "That is a very large sum of money for a stranger." "It is," Xavier agreed, "but I think you are worth it. Any person deserves a chance at a decent life." Before Sophia could respond, the auctioneer called out to them. "Mr. Lancaster, if you and your bride would follow me, we will get the paperwork sorted and find the preacher." Xavier offered his arm to Sophia. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, and he helped her down from the platform. His touch was steady and respectful, and Sophia found some of her fear beginning to ease, replaced by cautious hope. The next hour passed in a blur. They signed papers in a stuffy office above the general store, with the auctioneer and a clerk serving as witnesses. Sophia's hand shook as she wrote her name, making her normally neat handwriting appear spidery and uncertain. Then they were ushered to a small church at the end of the main street, where a tired-looking preacher waited with his Bible. The ceremony was brief and impersonal. Sophia barely heard the words the preacher spoke. She was too aware of Xavier standing beside her, tall and solid and real. When prompted, she repeated her vows in a voice barely above a whisper, and Xavier spoke his in that same low, steady tone he had used with her before. Then the preacher declared them man and wife, and it was done. Sophia Jenkins was now Sophia Lancaster, married to a man she had met less than 2 hours ago. Xavier thanked the preacher and pressed a few coins into his hand, then turned to Sophia. "I have a wagon outside. We should head to the ranch before it gets dark. The road can be difficult to navigate once the sun sets." Sophia nodded, still too overwhelmed to form coherent sentences. She followed Xavier out of the church and down the street to where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to 2 strong-looking horses. Xavier helped her up onto the bench seat with the same careful courtesy he had shown all afternoon, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they left Portland behind, heading west toward the hills that rose in the distance, Sophia finally found her voice again. "How long have you had your ranch?" Xavier seemed pleased that she was talking. "About 4 years now. I worked as a ranch hand for nearly 8 years before that, saving every penny I could. When old Mr. Garrett decided to sell his place and move back east to be with his daughter, I had just enough to make him an offer. It is not a huge spread, only about 200 acres, but it is good land with water access and decent grazing for cattle." "You have many cattle?" "About 50 head right now. I am building the herd slowly. I also have horses, chickens, and a milk cow, and a dog named Buck who is probably wondering where I have been all day." He glanced at her. "Do you like animals?" "I do," Sophia said softly. "We had chickens back home before." She trailed off, not wanting to relive the memory of the fire. Xavier seemed to understand. "I am sorry for your loss. I lost my own parents when I was younger. My father died in a mining accident when I was 12, and my mother passed from fever 2 years later. I know what it is like to be alone." Sophia looked at him with new understanding. Perhaps that was part of why he had bid on her. He knew what it was like to be desperate and vulnerable, with no one to turn to. "Do you have any other family?" "A brother, but we have not spoken in years. He went north to Montana Territory to try his hand at prospecting. Last I heard, he had not found much luck, but that was 3 years ago." Xavier adjusted his grip on the reins. "What about you? You said you came from Pennsylvania." "Yes, from a small town outside Philadelphia. My father was a school teacher, and my mother took in sewing. We did not have much, but we were happy." Sophia's voice grew thick with emotion. "When they died, I discovered my father had borrowed money to pay for medicine for my mother when she had been sick the previous year. The creditors came immediately. They took everything, even my mother's wedding ring. My cousin wrote and said she could help me, but I had to come to Oregon. I thought she meant to give me a place to stay while I found work as a teacher or a seamstress. Instead, I found out she had promised me to that auctioneer to cover the cost of my travel and to make a profit for herself." Xavier's hands tightened on the reins and his jaw clenched. "That was wrong of her. Did she even give you a choice?" "No. She told me the morning of the auction. I tried to argue, but she said if I did not go through with it, she would have me arrested for theft, claiming I had stolen from her to pay for my passage. I had no money for a lawyer and no one to vouch for me." Tears finally spilled down Sophia's cheeks. "I am sorry. You probably did not want to marry a woman who does nothing but cry." "You have every right to cry," Xavier said firmly. "You have been through a terrible ordeal. But I meant what I said earlier, Sophia. No one is going to hurt you anymore, not while I am around." The sincerity in his voice made Sophia's heart clench. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "Thank you, Xavier. I will try to be a good wife to you. I can cook and clean, and so I will earn my keep." "You are not a servant," Xavier said quietly. "You are my wife. We are partners now. That means we share the work and the decisions. I do not expect you to wait on me hand and foot. I expect us to build a life together." Sophia did not know what to say to that. In her experience, wives were expected to obey their husbands without question. The idea of being treated as an equal partner was foreign to her, but not unwelcome. She sat in silence as the wagon rolled on, watching the landscape change from the bustling town to open countryside. The Oregon wilderness was beautiful, she had to admit, with its rolling hills covered in grass and wildflowers and the distant mountains rising like sentinels against the sky. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Xavier pointed ahead. "There. That is home." Sophia followed his gaze and saw a small ranch nestled in a valley. There was a modest cabin built of logs, a barn, a chicken coop, and several fenced pastures. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, which confused Sophia until Xavier explained. I asked my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, to keep an eye on the place while I was gone. He probably started a fire in the stove for us. He is a good man, widowed about 5 years ago. He and his son run the ranch next to mine. Sure enough, as they approached, an older man with gray hair and a weathered face emerged from the cabin. Beside him trotted a large brown and white dog who barked excitedly at the sight of the wagon. Xavier pulled the horses to a stop and jumped down, greeting the dog with a firm pat on the head. Buck, settle down. Mr. Thompson, thank you for looking after things. No trouble at all, Xavier. Mr. Thompson's eyes moved to Sophia with curiosity. I see you brought company. Xavier helped Sophia down from the wagon. Mr. Thompson, this is my wife, Sophia. Sophia, this is James Thompson, my neighbor and friend. James Thompson's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he quickly recovered and tipped his hat to Sophia. Mrs. Lancaster, it is a pleasure to meet you. Congratulations to you both. Thank you, Sophia murmured, feeling her cheeks heat with embarrassment. I started a fire and put on some coffee, James said to Xavier. Figured you might be getting back around this time. I will leave you two to settle in. Sophia, if you need anything at all, my place is about 2 miles east. My son Thomas and I are always happy to help. That is very kind of you, Sophia said softly. After James left, Xavier turned to Sophia. Let me show you around before it gets too dark. He led her first to the cabin. It was a single large room with a fireplace at one end and a wood-burning stove near the other. There was a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, a dresser, and a bed in the far corner covered with a patchwork quilt. The walls were bare but clean and the wooden floor was swept. It was simple, but it was neat and well maintained. I know it is not much, Xavier said, sounding almost apologetic. I built it myself when I bought the land. I always figured I would add on to it eventually, make it bigger. I just never had much reason to before now. It is nice, Sophia said honestly. After weeks of uncertainty, even this modest cabin felt like a sanctuary. It feels like a home. Xavier smiled, and Sophia realized it was the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. I am glad you think so. Come on, I will show you the rest. They walked to the barn where 3 horses nickered in greeting and a cow lowed from her stall. Xavier introduced each animal by name, and Sophia was charmed by the clear affection he had for them. Then they checked on the chickens, who were settling down for the night in their coop. Throughout the tour, Buck the dog stayed close to Xavier's side, though he kept casting curious glances at Sophia. By the time they returned to the cabin, full darkness had fallen and Sophia was exhausted. The emotional and physical strain of the day had caught up with her, and she could barely keep her eyes open. You should eat something, Xavier said, moving to the stove where a pot of stew sat warming. James must have brought this over. He is always cooking too much and sharing the extra. Sophia tried to eat, but she could only manage a few bites. Xavier watched her with concern but did not push. When she set down her spoon, he stood and moved to the dresser, pulling out a neatly folded nightgown. This was my mother's, he said quietly. I kept a few of her things. I thought you might need something clean to sleep in until we can get you some proper clothes. Sophia took the nightgown with trembling hands. Thank you. That is very thoughtful. An awkward silence fell between them. Sophia's eyes moved to the bed, the only bed in the corner. Her heart began to pound. She was married now and she knew what was expected of wives. But the thought of sharing that bed with this man she barely knew, no matter how kind he had been, filled her with terror. Xavier seemed to read her thoughts. He cleared his throat. Sophia, I want you to take the bed. I will sleep on the floor by the fire. I have a bedroll that I use when I am out with the cattle overnight. It is comfortable enough. Sophia's eyes widened. But this is your home. I cannot take your bed. You are my wife. That makes it your home too. Xavier moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a thick bedroll and blanket. I mean what I said about respecting you. That includes giving you time to adjust to all this. We can take things slow. There is no rush. Sophia felt tears threaten again. You are very kind, Xavier. I do not know what I did to deserve such consideration. You deserve it just by being a person, Xavier said simply. Now go ahead and change. I will step outside for a few minutes to give you privacy. True to his word, he left the cabin. Sophia quickly changed into the nightgown, which was slightly too large but clean and soft. She climbed into the bed, which was more comfortable than she had expected, with a real mattress stuffed with straw and feathers. She pulled the quilt up to her chin and called out that Xavier could come back in. He entered, pointedly keeping his eyes averted until he was sure she was under the covers. Then he set about making his bed on the floor near the fireplace. Buck settled down beside him with a contented sigh. "Good night, Sophia," Xavier said softly, extinguishing the lantern. "Good night, Xavier," she whispered back in the darkness. Sophia stared up at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had started this day as a frightened girl standing on an auction block, and she was ending it as a married woman in a stranger's home. But that stranger had shown her more kindness in a few hours than many people had shown her in her entire life. Perhaps, she thought as exhaustion finally pulled her under, perhaps there was hope for her future after all. The next morning, Sophia woke to the sound of movement in the cabin. She opened her eyes to see Xavier already dressed and stoking the fire in the stove. Weak sunlight filtered through the window, suggesting it was still quite early. "I am sorry," Xavier said when he noticed she was awake. "I tried to be quiet. I am used to rising with the sun. There are always chores to do on a ranch." Sophia sat up, clutching the quilt to her chest. "What time is it? A little past 6, I would guess." He straightened and turned to face her. "I was going to make some breakfast before I head out to tend the animals. Do you want to rest more, or would you like to join me? I will get up," Sophia said. She was not used to lying abed while there was work to be done. "If you give me a moment to dress." Xavier nodded and stepped outside again. Sophia quickly dressed in the same gray dress from yesterday, her only dress, and ran her fingers through her long hair, trying to make herself presentable. When she called Xavier back in, he had a bucket of fresh water with him. "From the well," he explained. "I figured you might want to wash up." They worked together to make breakfast, a simple meal of eggs from the chickens, bread that James had apparently left, and coffee. Sophia found herself relaxing as they moved around the small cabin. Xavier was easy to be around, not demanding or overbearing. He asked her opinion on how she liked her eggs and whether she wanted milk in her coffee. Small things, but they made her feel valued. After breakfast, Xavier showed her where everything was in the cabin: the few dishes they had, the supplies in the pantry, the linens in the trunk. "I know you said you can cook, but I do not expect you to do everything. I have been taking care of myself for years. We will share the work." "I want to help," Sophia insisted. "You spent a great deal of money yesterday. The least I can do is make myself useful." Xavier frowned. "Sophia, you are not here to earn your keep. You are here because you are my wife." "A wife I did not want," Sophia blurted out, then immediately regretted it when she saw Xavier's expression shift. But instead of anger, he just looked sad. "I know, and I am sorry for that. I wish you had come here under better circumstances. But we are married now, and we have to make the best of it. I hope that eventually you will come to see this as your home and me as someone you can trust. That is all I ask." Sophia felt ashamed of her outburst. "I am sorry. That was unkind. You have been nothing but good to me. I am just frightened and confused, and I do not know how to act or what to say." "Then just be yourself," Xavier said gently. "That is enough." Over the next several days, Sophia began to settle into a routine. She rose each morning with Xavier and helped prepare breakfast. Then, while he went out to tend the cattle and horses, she cleaned the cabin, fed the chickens, collected eggs, and started preparing the midday meal. Xavier always came back for lunch, and they would eat together while he told her about the work he was doing. In the afternoons, Sophia would work on mending his clothes, which desperately needed attention, or tending the small vegetable garden behind the cabin. Evenings were spent preparing supper and then sitting by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Xavier continued to sleep on the floor by the fireplace, never once suggesting any other arrangement. Sophia was grateful for his restraint, but she also felt guilty. She could see that the hard floor was not comfortable for him, despite his assurances. He often rose with stiff shoulders, and she noticed him rubbing his back when he thought she was not looking. On the 5th day of their marriage, James Thompson rode over with his son, Thomas. Thomas was a young man of about 22 with friendly eyes and an easy smile. He tipped his hat to Sophia respectfully and greeted her warmly. "Father told me Xavier had gotten himself married," Thomas said with a grin. "I had to come see for myself. Congratulations, Mrs. Lancaster." "Thank you," Sophia said, still not used to being called by her married name. James had brought a basket of food, fresh bread, a jar of preserves, some dried apples, and a smoked ham. "From our place," he explained. "I know Xavier is a decent cook, but he tends to stick to the basics. Thought you might appreciate some variety." "This is very generous," Sophia said, genuinely touched. "Thank you so much." The four of them shared lunch together, and Sophia found herself enjoying the company. Thomas was chatty and entertaining, telling stories about mishaps on his ranch that had Xavier laughing. It was good to see Xavier relax. Over the past few days, Sophia had noticed that he always seemed to be on guard, as if he was worried about saying or doing something that would frighten her. After the Thompsons left, Xavier and Sophia cleaned up the lunch dishes together. "They are good people," Xavier said. "I was lucky to end up with them as neighbors. Some ranchers around here can be difficult, always arguing about water rights or stolen cattle, but James and Thomas have always been fair and friendly." "I like them," Sophia agreed. She hesitated, then added, "Thomas mentioned there is a town gathering next week, a dance and dinner to celebrate the founding of Portland. Do people from the outlying ranches usually attend?" Xavier nodded. "Most folks do. It is one of the few times we all get together for something other than work or church. Are you interested in going?" "I do not have anything appropriate to wear," Sophia admitted, "but it might be nice to meet more of the neighbors." "We can get you a new dress," Xavier said immediately. "In fact, we should go into town this week anyway. You need more clothes, and we are running low on a few supplies." 2 days later, they made the trip back into Portland. Sophia felt nervous returning to the town where she had been auctioned off, but Xavier stayed close to her side, his presence reassuring. They went first to the general store where Xavier purchased flour, sugar, coffee, and other necessities. Then he took her to the dress shop. The proprietor, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Hartley, was kind and efficient. She showed Sophia several ready-made dresses and offered to do alterations on the spot. Sophia chose a simple but pretty blue calico dress for everyday wear, and a nicer green dress with lace trim for special occasions like the town gathering. "The green brings out your eyes," Xavier said when she modeled it. The compliment made Sophia blush, while Mrs. Hardly did the alterations, Xavier and Sophia walked down the main street. They passed the church where they had been married, and Sophia felt a complicated mix of emotions. So much had changed in such a short time. "Sophia," Xavier said suddenly, stopping in front of a small shop. "Would you wait here for just a moment? There is something I need to do." Curious, Sophia nodded. Xavier disappeared into the shop, which appeared to be a jeweler's. He emerged a few minutes later with a small package, which he tucked into his pocket without explanation. When they returned to collect the altered dresses, Xavier insisted on buying Sophia 2 more work dresses and a warm shawl. "Winter comes early here," he explained. "You will need warm things." Sophia protested the expense, but Xavier was firm. "I want you to have what you need." On the ride back to the ranch, Sophia found herself studying Xavier's profile. He was not a conventionally handsome man. His features were too rough for that, but there was something appealing about him. He had an honest face, and his eyes, when they looked at her, were always kind. She was beginning to realize how fortunate she had been that he was the one who bid on her. If one of those other men had won, her life would be very different now. That evening, after supper, Xavier cleared his throat nervously. "Sophia, there is something I want to give you." He pulled out the small package from the jeweler and handed it to her. With trembling fingers, Sophia unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold wedding band. "Xavier," she whispered, shocked. "I realized after the wedding that I never gave you a ring," he said. "Every wife should have a ring. I know it is not fancy, but I wanted you to have something." Sophia felt tears well up in her eyes. She had not expected this, had not even thought about the absence of a ring. But the fact that Xavier had noticed and cared enough to remedy it touched her deeply. "It is perfect. Thank you." Xavier took the ring and gently slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. For a long moment they sat there, Xavier's hand still holding hers, and Sophia felt something shift between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. A connection. A foundation. The night of the town gathering arrived. Sophia dressed carefully in her new green dress, pinning her hair up in a style her mother had taught her. When she emerged from behind the privacy screen Xavier had rigged up for her, she found him waiting in his best clothes, clean trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a vest. He had even trimmed his hair and shaved. "You look beautiful," he said softly, and the sincerity in his voice made Sophia's heart flutter. "You look very handsome," she replied, and was rewarded with that rare, transforming smile. They rode into town in the wagon as the sun was setting. The town square had been decorated with lanterns and bunting, and long tables were set up with food brought by various families. A group of musicians with fiddles, a guitar, and a harmonica were already playing lively music. People milled about, talking and laughing. As soon as they arrived, they were surrounded by neighbors. The Thompsons greeted them warmly, and James introduced them to several other ranching families. Everyone was curious about Xavier's new wife, but most people were kind. A few of the older women gave Sophia knowing looks that made her uncomfortable, clearly aware of how she had come to be Xavier's bride, but no one said anything directly. During dinner, Sophia found herself seated next to a woman about her own age named Clara. Clara was married to one of the local shopkeepers and was friendly and talkative. "I am so glad to meet another young woman," Clara said. "Most of the wives around here are at least 10 years older than me. It will be nice to have a friend closer to my own age." "I would like that," Sophia said shyly. After dinner, the dancing began. Xavier approached Sophia and offered his hand. "Would you dance with me?" Sophia hesitated. "I have not danced in years. I might step on your feet." "Then we will both be clumsy together," Xavier said with a smile. He led her onto the makeshift dance floor, and they joined the other couples in a simple reel. Xavier was right. He was not a graceful dancer, but he was enthusiastic and patient. When Sophia did step on his foot, he just laughed and told her not to worry. By the third dance, they had found a rhythm together, and Sophia found herself actually enjoying it. As they danced, Sophia looked up at Xavier and realized she was happy. It was a startling revelation. For weeks, she had been so consumed by grief and fear that she had forgotten what happiness felt like. But here, now, spinning around the dance floor in her husband's arms with music playing and stars shining overhead, she was happy. Xavier must have seen something in her expression because he pulled her a little closer. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Sophia said and meant it. "I am all right." The weeks that followed were peaceful. Autumn arrived in full force, painting the hills in shades of gold and red. Sophia threw herself into preparing the ranch for winter, preserving vegetables from the garden, making jams and pickles, and helping Xavier with the heavier outdoor work when he needed an extra pair of hands. She also began to feel more comfortable around him. They talked more during meals and in the evenings, sharing stories about their childhoods and their hopes for the future. Xavier told her about his dream of expanding the ranch, maybe even building a real house someday with multiple rooms. Sophia shared her love of reading and her regret that she had lost all her books in the fire. The next time Xavier went to town, he returned with 3 books he had purchased from the general store. "I know they are not much," he said as he handed them to her. "But the storekeeper said these are popular. I thought you might enjoy them." Sophia clutched the books to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Thank you, Xavier. This is wonderful." One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after supper, Sophia found herself watching Xavier. He was mending a broken bridle, his large hands working with surprising dexterity. He had rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms, and his face was relaxed and peaceful. He looked up and caught her staring. "Something on your mind?" he asked. Sophia felt her cheeks heat. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now compared to a few months ago. If someone had told me then that I would be living on a ranch in Oregon, married to a cowboy, I would not have believed them." "Do you regret it?" Xavier asked quietly, setting down the bridle. Sophia considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "I did not choose this path, but I do not regret where it has led me. You have been good to me, Xavier, better than I had any right to expect." Xavier stood and moved to sit in the rocking chair closer to where Sophia sat on the floor by the hearth. "Sophia, I need to tell you something. I have been thinking about it for a while, and I think you should know." Sophia's heart began to pound. "What is it?" "When I bid on you at that auction, I told you it was because I wanted to save you from those other men, and that was true, but it was not the whole truth." Xavier ran a hand through his hair, looking nervous. "The truth is, when I saw you standing up there looking so scared and alone, something in my chest just clenched. I felt this overwhelming need to protect you. And then when you looked up at me with those green eyes, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I know I should not have felt that way about a stranger, but I did." Sophia stared at him, shocked. "You thought I was beautiful, even then?" "Especially then," Xavier said. "You had been through something terrible and you were frightened, but you were holding your head up. You were not broken." That took courage. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "These past weeks, getting to know you, living with you, have been the best of my life. I know we married under strange circumstances, and I know you did not have a choice, but I want you to know that I do not regret it for a second. I am falling in love with you, Sophia. I think I started falling the moment I saw you." Sophia felt tears streaming down her face. "Xavier, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I am not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know how I feel." I understand if you do not feel the same way. I know you need time, maybe a long time, and that is all right. I will wait." But Sophia was shaking her head. "You do not understand. I am crying because I do feel the same way. I did not realize it until just now, but I do. You have been so kind and patient with me. You have given me a home and safety and respect. You make me laugh and you make me feel valued. I think I am falling in love with you too." The look of joy on Xavier's face was almost painful in its intensity. "Truly, truly," Sophia whispered. Xavier slid from the chair and knelt beside her on the floor. "May I kiss you?" In answer, Sophia leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet. Xavier's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Does this mean," Xavier said softly, "that you would be willing for us to really be husband and wife, not just in name but in truth?" Sophia felt her face burn, but she nodded. "Yes, I want that." That night, Xavier did not sleep by the fireplace. Sophia waited in the bed, nervous but certain of her decision. When Xavier joined her, he was gentle and patient, taking care to make sure she was comfortable. And later, wrapped in his arms with her head resting on his chest, Sophia felt truly safe for the first time since her parents had died. Winter arrived with its first snowfall in mid-November. Sophia woke one morning to find the world outside transformed into a white wonderland. She and Xavier spent the day making sure the animals were secure and well fed, and then retreated to the warmth of the cabin. It was a hard winter, but Sophia did not mind. The cabin felt cozy rather than cramped, especially now that she and Xavier shared the bed. They spent the long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and planning for the spring. Xavier taught her to play chess using a set his father had carved years ago, and Sophia taught him some of the songs her mother had loved. James and Thomas Thompson visited when they could, braving the snow to check on their neighbors. Clara, Sophia's new friend from town, came by twice with her husband, and Sophia was delighted to have female company. Clara was expecting her first child in the spring, and she and Sophia spent hours talking about babies and child rearing on Christmas. Xavier surprised Sophia with a gift, a beautiful shawl made of soft wool, dyed a deep blue. "I ordered it from a catalog," he explained. "I wanted you to have something special." Sophia had made him a new shirt, painstakingly stitching every seam by hand. When he opened the package and saw it, his eyes grew misty. "It is perfect, thank you." They spent a quiet Christmas day together, just the two of them and Buck. They roasted a chicken and made biscuits and gravy, and Xavier produced a precious tin of peaches he had been saving for a special occasion. After dinner, they sat by the fire and Xavier pulled Sophia into his lap. "I have been thinking," he said. "Next spring, I want to start building an addition to the cabin, a bedroom for us and maybe another small room that could be a nursery someday. Would you like that, a nursery?" Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Xavier, are you saying you want children?" "I do," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I know it is early to be thinking about it, but I cannot help it. When I imagine our future, I see children running around this ranch, helping with the chores and learning to ride horses. I see us growing old together, surrounded by family." "Is that something you would want?" Sophia wrapped her arms around his neck. "Yes, I want that very much." In late January, Sophia began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be certain before telling Xavier. When she finally did, on a cold February evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." Xavier became impossibly protective after that. He insisted that Sophia rest more and refused to let her do any heavy work. Sophia found it both endearing and frustrating, but she knew it came from a place of love. Spring arrived, bringing with it warmer weather and new life. The hills turned green again, and wildflowers bloomed everywhere. True to his word, Xavier began construction on the addition to the cabin. James and Thomas came over to help, and even a few other neighbors pitched in. The community, Sophia had learned, took care of its own. Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy in late April, and Sophia visited her as soon as she could. Holding that tiny baby in her arms, knowing that in a few months she would have her own child, filled her with wonder and a little fear. "You will be a wonderful mother," Clara assured her. "You have such a kind heart." As Sophia's pregnancy progressed, she and Xavier grew even closer. They spent hours talking about names and making plans for the future. Xavier worked tirelessly on the addition, determined to have it finished before the baby arrived. By early September, the new bedroom was complete, with a real window and a door that closed for privacy. Xavier had even built a cradle, carefully sanding each piece until it was smooth and safe. On a warm evening in late September, Sophia went into labor. Xavier rode hard to fetch the doctor from town and Clara, who had offered to help with the birth. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sophia thought she could not endure another minute. But Xavier stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. Finally, just after dawn, their son was born. He was small but healthy, with a surprising amount of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly, as evidenced by his loud cries. The doctor placed the baby in Sophia's arms, and she stared down at him in awe. "He is perfect," she whispered. Xavier, tears streaming down his face, leaned over to kiss his wife and then his son. "He is incredible. You are incredible." They named him Samuel, after Xavier's father, with the middle name Robert after Sophia's father. Little Samuel Robert Lancaster was the pride and joy of his parents' lives. The years that followed were full and happy. Xavier's ranch prospered, and he was able to buy more land and cattle. The house grew too, with another room added when their daughter, Emma, was born 2 years after Samuel. And then, 3 years after that, twin boys arrived, James and William. Sophia often thought back to that day when she had stood on the auction block, frightened and alone, asking Xavier why he had chosen her. She understood now. He had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself: strength, resilience, and the capacity for love. And she had seen in him the kind of goodness and decency that was rare in any time or place. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Sophia back to Portland. The town had grown considerably, with new buildings and businesses springing up. But the church where they had married was still there. They stood outside it, holding hands and watching the sunset. "You remember what you asked me that first day," Xavier said. "You looked up at me and asked why I bid on you." "I remember," Sophia said. "And do you remember what you said?" "You said you thought I deserved a chance at a decent life." "I did not give you that life," Xavier corrected gently. "We built it together. Everything we have, everything we are, we did it as partners." Sophia squeezed his hand. "You saved me, Xavier. Not just from a bad situation, but from a life without love. I will never forget that." "You saved me too," Xavier said. "I was so alone before you came. I did not even realize how much I needed someone until I saw you." They returned home that evening to find their 4 children being watched by James and Thomas Thompson, who were now both married themselves. Samuel, at 9 years old, was proudly showing his younger siblings how to brush down the horses. Emma, at 7, was trying to organize everyone. And the 5-year-old twins were running in circles, playing some game only they understood. As Sophia watched her children, safe and happy on the ranch that she and Xavier had built together, she felt profound gratitude. Her life had not turned out the way she had planned, but it had turned out better than she ever could have imagined. In the years that followed, the Lancaster ranch continued to thrive. Samuel grew into a fine young man who loved working with the cattle just like his father. Emma proved to have her mother's gentle heart and her father's determination, and she became an excellent horsewoman. The twins, James and William, were inseparable troublemakers who kept their parents constantly on their toes. When Samuel was 15, Xavier and Sophia were surprised to find out they were expecting again. Their fifth child, a daughter they named Rose, was born when Sophia was 33. She was the baby of the family, doted on by her older siblings. The community around them grew as well. Portland continued to expand, and more families settled in the area. The Lancasters were well respected, known for their hard work and generosity. Xavier served on the town council for several years, and Sophia started a lending library in their home, sharing her love of books with neighbors who had limited access to reading material. As their children grew and started families of their own, the ranch became a gathering place for the extended Lancaster family. Samuel married a sweet girl from town and took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Emma fell in love with a young man from a neighboring ranch, and they built a home on the edge of Lancaster land. The twins both became ranch hands, working alongside their father and brother. On a warm summer evening when Xavier was 52 and Sophia was 49, they sat together on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over the hills. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter filling the air. Rose, now 16, was inside preparing supper with Emma, who had come for a visit. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Xavier asked, his arm around Sophia's shoulders. Sophia leaned into him, comfortable in his embrace. "Not in my wildest dreams. When I was standing on that auction block, I thought my life was over. I could not imagine a future at all. And now look at us. 5 children, 7 grandchildren so far, a beautiful home and a life full of love." "You know," Xavier said thoughtfully, "I never told you this, but I almost did not go to that auction. I thought it was wrong, and I did not want to participate in something that treated people as property. But something made me go. A feeling, maybe, or fate. Whatever it was, I am grateful every day that I listened to it." "I am grateful too," Sophia said, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they brought me here to you." Xavier turned to look at his wife. After more than 30 years of marriage, she was still beautiful to him. Her chestnut hair was now threaded with silver, and there were lines around her eyes, but when she smiled at him, he still saw the frightened young woman who had looked up at him and asked, "Why me?" "I love you," he said, as he had said thousands of times over the years. "I love you too," Sophia replied, as she always did. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together in peaceful silence. Their story had begun in the most unlikely way, with an auction in a dusty town square. But it had become a story of love, partnership, and family. It was a story they would tell their grandchildren, and their grandchildren would tell their own children. The story of how a rugged cowboy bid on a shy bride, and together they built a life that neither of them could have imagined. The seasons continued to turn, bringing with them the rhythm of ranch life. Winters were spent mostly indoors, with the family gathered around the large fireplace that Xavier had built years ago. Springs brought new calves and colts, and the hard work of planting and repairs. Summers were full of long days and abundant harvests, and autumns brought the changing leaves and the work of preparing for winter once again. Through it all, Xavier and Sophia remained devoted to each other. They had their disagreements, of course. All couples did, but they had learned early on to talk through their problems rather than letting resentment build. They had weathered difficult times together. Years when the weather was bad and the cattle did not thrive. A scary bout of illness that nearly took Emma when she was young. The heartbreak of losing James Thompson to a heart attack. But they had also celebrated countless joys. Birthdays and weddings, the birth of each grandchild, good harvests and successful sales. When Xavier was 60 and Sophia was 57, they decided it was time to step back from the daily running of the ranch. Samuel and his wife had proven themselves more than capable, and Xavier's joints were starting to ache in the cold weather. They built a smaller cabin on the edge of the property, near a creek with a beautiful view of the mountains. "Our retirement home," Xavier joked as they moved in. But they were never truly retired. There was always a grandchild who needed watching, or a hand needed with canning or repairs, and they both loved sitting on their porch, watching the life they had built continue to flourish around them. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a large celebration. The entire community came, and the party lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing, just like that first town gathering where Xavier and Sophia had danced together. "May I have this dance?" Xavier asked, offering his hand to his wife. Sophia took it with a smile. "You may." They were both slower now, their movements not as sure as they once were, but they still knew how to move together, still fit perfectly in each other's arms. As they swayed to the music, Sophia rested her head on Xavier's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. 40 years, she murmured. "It seems like so long ago and yet also like yesterday." "I would do it all again," Xavier said. "Every single moment, even the hard parts. Even those. They made us who we are, they made us stronger." Sophia looked up at her husband. His hair was now completely white and his face was deeply lined. But his eyes, those blue-gray eyes that had first caught her attention so many years ago, were still kind and full of love. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For choosing me. For seeing something in me worth saving. For giving me this life." Xavier cupped her face gently in his weathered hands. "Thank you for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held 40 years of love and devotion. Around them, their children and grandchildren watched with affection, and a touch of amused embarrassment, the way families always do when elderly couples show affection. But Xavier and Sophia did not care. They were lost in their own world, remembering the young people they had been and celebrating the life they had shared. As they grew older, they spent more and more time in their little cabin by the creek. Xavier's joints grew stiffer, and Sophia's eyesight began to fail, making reading difficult. But they still had each other, and that was all that mattered. On quiet evenings, they would sit together and reminisce. They talked about the early days on the ranch, when it had been just the two of them and everything had seemed so uncertain. They remembered the births of each of their children, the funny things the kids had done, the challenges they had overcome. "You have any regrets?" Sophia asked Xavier one evening when they were both in their 70s. Xavier thought for a long moment. "Only one," he said finally. "I wish I could have given you a choice. I wish you could have come to me willingly, not because circumstances forced you to." Sophia shook her head. "I would not change a thing. Yes, I did not choose to be on that auction block, but I did choose to let myself love you. I chose to build this life with you. Every day since then I have been choosing you, Xavier. Never doubt that." Xavier's eyes grew misty. "I choose you too, Sophia, today and always." They lived to see their children grow old themselves, to meet great-grandchildren, to watch their ranch expand and prosper beyond anything they had imagined. The Lancaster name became well known throughout Oregon, synonymous with hard work, integrity, and strong family values. Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Sophia holding his hand. It was a gentle passing, the kind everyone hopes for. Sophia mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the life they had shared. At his funeral, she stood before the gathered crowd and spoke of their love story, from that first day at the auction to their final moments together. "He saved me," she told them, her voice steady despite her tears. "But more than that, he loved me. He chose me, and he never stopped choosing me. I am so grateful for every moment we had together." Sophia lived for 3 more years after Xavier's death. She spent that time surrounded by family, telling stories about Xavier and their life together. She wanted her grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know the kind of man he had been, the kind of love they had shared, on a warm spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming and the hills were green. Sophia passed away in her sleep. She was 81 years old. Her family buried her next to Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. At her funeral, Samuel, now an old man himself, spoke about his parents. "My mother used to tell us that she thought her life was over when she stood on that auction block. But it was actually just beginning. She and my father showed all of us what true love looks like: patient, kind, enduring. They built something beautiful together, not just this ranch, but a family and a legacy that will continue for generations. We are all blessed to be a part of their story." Years passed, and the Lancaster Ranch continued to thrive. Xavier and Sophia's descendants spread throughout Oregon and beyond, but they always remembered the story of their great-great-grandparents. The rugged cowboy who saw a frightened young woman and chose to save her, and the shy bride who asked, "Why me?" and received a lifetime of love as her answer. In the town of Portland, which had grown from a rough frontier settlement into a thriving city, there was a small museum dedicated to the history of the region. Among the exhibits was a display about the early ranching families, and prominently featured were Xavier and Sophia Lancaster. There was a photograph of them taken on their 50th wedding anniversary, standing in front of their ranch house, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. In the photo, they were holding hands and smiling at the camera, their love for each other evident even in that frozen moment. And sometimes, visitors to the museum would read their story and think about how strange and wonderful life could be. How the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes. How love could grow in the most unlikely circumstances. How 2 people, brought together by chance and difficult circumstances, could build something beautiful that would last for generations. The story of Xavier and Sophia Lancaster became a legend in the community, told and retold, a reminder that love can be found in unexpected places, and that kindness and compassion can change lives. It was a story that began with a frightened young woman on an auction block and a kind-hearted cowboy with $75, and it ended with a legacy of love that would never be forgotten. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the Lancaster Ranch, now expanded to over 1,000 acres. They still raise cattle and horses, still work the land that Xavier and Sophia claimed so long ago. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Oregon hills, you can almost imagine you see 2 figures sitting on the porch of that original cabin, holding hands and watching the sunset, their love as enduring as the land itself.